When we start meditating on a regular basis, we start to be able to slow our mind down. When we start to slow our mind down, we start to create space so that when we look inward, we start to notice that space in our hearts where our intuitive self resides. And it's when we understand the language of our intuitive self, we can start to pay attention towards where that energy is meant to be taking us. And it's only then that we can start to make the changes in our lives, that we can start aligning this intuitive guidance that we receive with the material circumstances of our lives externally. And this is the way to contentment. This is the pathway to peace. One of the things that I've been reflecting on in recent times is how my yoga practice and meditative practices in general have really helped me to understand myself so much better. Still a lot of work to do, still lots of things that need unpicking. However, one thing I can say is this, is that before I started practicing yoga, before I started meditating on a regular daily basis, I was completely and utterly consumed by my thoughts. In fact, my thoughts were what I thought I was. To put that another way, every time a thought came through my mind, I believed it to be true. Every time a thought came through my mind, I believed it to be what I was. And actually, when you look back and you understand how Buddha, the great Lord Buddha, talks about the mind, he says you are what you think, in the sense that your thoughts, literally, and your attachment to your thoughts, construct the world that you see around us. And that's why there's this famous saying that's often mentioned in India, is that when a pickpocket meets a saint, the only thing he sees are the saint's pockets. Because all he thinks about in his mind is the next pocket that he's going to pick, which unfortunately for him means that he doesn't realize that he's standing in front of a saint from whom he can receive blessings and guidance to move beyond material suffering. So what my practice has helped me to understand is that prior to having a practice, I was always hijacked and totally consumed by my thoughts. And as a result of that, I was completely and utterly at the beck and call of those thoughts. If it was a positive thought, I'd be in a good mood. If it was a negative or fearful thought, I'd be in a bad mood. If it was a thought about shame or a thought about failure, then I would feel dejected or I would feel worried. And essentially, my whole mood and my emotional state and my psychological balance was determined by the nature of thought that was passing through my mind at any one moment. Now, if you think about that at a deeper level, and you think about that in relation to alignment, which is the topic that we are covering this month, and when we talk about the idea of alignment, what I said in the last video is aligning with our intuitive self. Aligning with what we might call that divine space, that light within us, which seeks to guide, which seeks to clear a path for us of understanding of what it is we are meant to be manifesting in this life, in this embodiment, in this incarnation. And the challenge is that when you are in a state that I've described myself to have been some years ago, and still in some ways now, when you're completely consumed by your thoughts, there is no space, there is no silence in which you can hear the calling of that divine energy or the calling of that intuition within you. And it's interesting because a teacher that I spent a fair amount of time with in India often used to talk about the idea of supreme silence. And he mentioned supreme silence in relation to a state that we can reach when we become fully absorbed inwardly and our mind ceases to have thought. And in that supreme silence, that is the space where we can have a relationship with the divine. That is the space where we can have a relationship with this intuitive capacity or consciousness or this light within us. And what I've noticed is that gradually over time, bit by bit, day by day, week by week, month by month, the more I practice, the more I am able to hold space in my mind where I can turn down to a certain degree the activity of those thoughts, and perhaps as importantly as that, my attachment to those thoughts, and create space to look within and to hear that voice rising powerfully from within my heart space. It really isn't an accident or a coincidence in any way, shape, or form that a year or two after I started practicing yoga and meditation, that energy became so powerful that my external life, I knew it had to change. And as many of you know, I closed down my company. I started to take time to just spend time on my own and to meditate and to practice more yoga and to look inwards and to do some healing work and so on and so forth. And I believe that I only did that because of the space that my yoga and meditation practice afforded my mind. The quieting of those vrittis, the quietening of those activities in the mind created a space. And when that space was there, and when that supreme silence arose, I was able to hear crystal clear the energy coming from my heart space and what it was moving me to do. And it's so interesting that before that, when my mind was cluttered and when I was completely attached to the thoughts and the content passing through my mind, not only could I not hear that intuitive voice, but I actually truly felt like I was suffering. I just didn't know why. And the reality now, as I understand it, is that that suffering and that pain, that anguish, that emotional dissonance was coming from the fact that there was this very, very powerful energy within me, which is within all of us, that was guiding me to do something different with my life and to let go of some of the things that I had attached to psychologically. But because my mind was so busy, I couldn't hear it. So I continued to ignore that intuition, and I continued to ignore that energy, and I continued to attach into the things that were causing more and more suffering in my life because I didn't know of anything else that could take me out of the suffering. So I just thought I had to do more of the same. Yoga and meditation provided that space. Yoga and meditation provided that solace and that opening in my mind so that I could feel and connect to something deeper within. And what's so fascinating now is that whereas in the past, if I had a decision to make, I would spend hours and hours meticulously trying to think over, why should I do this? Why shouldn't I do that? What are the benefits of this decision? What are the disadvantages of making that decision? And eventually I would come to some kind of unsatisfactory answer based on some kind of psychological equation that I had constructed. What I realized now actually was that there was never any decision to be made. And at the right time in our lives, things just happen and we move in the direction. When we're strong enough, when we're ready enough, things just start to happen. So now, one of my practices is when I notice myself starting to overthink, should I do this or should I do that? Or overthink what course of action I should take, I step back and I let go of my thoughts and I bring my attention inwards and I allow myself just to create space. Not because I'm actually trying to find or listen to an answer, but just simply because I know that the act of creating space eventually will create the foundations for whatever path I'm supposed to follow to arise. And so that's why when we talk about alignment, although for some of us that alignment may perhaps arise naturally without us having to do anything at all, I think for most of us that alignment comes about when we take to some kind of meditative practice and we begin to stop the mind moving externally. We begin to understand at an experiential level what it means to attach to thought. And we begin to understand that by attaching to thought, we lose connection or our ability to hear that voice within. The more we hear that voice within, the more it moves us to act in a way in which it regards us as having a path in our lives. We move in a way according to its voice, and gradually everything in our lives can start to align. And that's a beautiful thing, because when we get to a stage of alignment, it doesn't mean that things are always easy, but we have such great depth of conviction in our hearts that this is what we are supposed to be doing, that it allows us to overcome all of our mental afflictions, and it allows us to overcome all of the roadblocks that may have traditionally arisen in our minds because of doubt, because we are absolutely moving and walking in faith. And finally, just to say before we finish today, finishing with faith, having faith that when you connect into that voice and having total conviction that faith will see you through, whatever you are doing, however you are doing it. Having faith that we can let go of the fear, having faith that even though the plan that seems to be arising is not the plan that we want, it is the plan of the universe unfolding within us. We are part of the cosmos, and therefore everything that unfolds within us is part of that magnificent intelligence. So getting out of our own way, seeing where life is taking us, and embracing it for everything that it can bring. Even if our mind judges it to be bad, even if our mind judges it to be challenging, there are great lessons to learn in times of challenge. There are great things that we can understand about ourselves and how we can transform ourselves in the fire of these difficulties. So as always, I'll finish by saying, please do reflect on what we've discussed today. And if you're not doing it already, as always, I encourage you, please see if you can take up a meditative practice. See if you can take up yoga on a regular basis and give it a few months. It's not to say that in a few months everything will be resolved, but you may find if you practice for a few months regularly, you will start to see the power that yoga can have to transform our lives. So thank you as always for listening. I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Namaste.